Hi, welcome to Fiberchats. My name is Irina, I'm the host, and my guest today is Ross Taylor from Twisted Ambitions. Welcome.
Hey.
I'm so glad you are my guest today. I was actually dying to talk to you for a while. So the first time I actually noticed you was, I think it was on Facebook. You were posting in some of the knitting groups. I think it was some Stephen West shawl. I don't remember. I just remember it was like very colorful and you were like enjoying the modeling gig.
Yes. Yes, I love to show off my knits, and any time to do a photo shoot is just perfect for me.
So let's go back a bit. Like, when did you start with knitting?
I think I started knitting about 12 years ago.
And how
Uh,
did that happen?
well, okay, so I was wearing my favorite hat and I was four-wheeling with a buddy in the woods, and I ended up going off the trail, losing my hat in the process. And I always wore hats. So it's like, how can I get a hat? And I just wanted to use, my creativeness. And so I ended up searching YouTube, how to knit, how to crochet, and I got into crocheting hats. And then I just was like, I need something more that just looked better. The fabric looked better to me. And so I picked up knitting off of YouTube and just learned from there.
So, when you're saying your creativeness, like, were you always creative? Did you do other things before you started knitting?
I did a whole bunch of art classes in school. And in high school, I wanted to do, I got into painting, sculpting, all of that. So I kind of have a creative, background from there.
Right. And how would you compare that to knitting? Like, what doors did knitting open for you as far as your creativity?
Yeah, it was a really good stress reliever. Always keeping my hands, occupied was a big thing because I'm really fidgety. I can't go to a movie theater and just sit there. I have to be doing something. So I like to take some knitting along to movies. But yeah, that's just how I work.
So, why at the beginning, right? I'm just trying to get the picture because a lot of people pick crochet first and then they somehow like switch to knitting. It's like I hear that a lot, much more so than people who need going then to learn crochet. Why do you think crochet seemed easier for you?
I think it was just the well, first I heard of crocheting in high school. One of my buddies would crochet a hat. It was really wonky. It was funny looking, but I was like, I could do that. I just, remembered him doing it. And I was like, oh, I'll try to learn how to crochet. And then I saw like Instagram was a big thing. I got on Instagram looking at crochet, and then I saw knitting, and I was like, okay, let's knit.
Right.
So
So, what was your yarn discovery? So, you started knitting. I assume it wasn't the most expensive hand dyed merino at that time.
right. Yeah. I got it from Hobby Lobby, Walmart,
Right.
uh, acrylic, all that yarn. It was cheap, affordable, and I can make tons and tons of hats without spending a lot of money. And then I got onto Instagram and, saw hashtags of indie dyers. And I was like, you could dye yarn. So that's where my journey began with dyeing yarn. And I started with Kool-Aid, dyeing with Kool-Aid and vinegar, and um, eventually stepped up to powdered dyes. And so,
So,
yeah.
let's talk about that Kool-Aid experience, right?
Mm.
Um, was it also like, did you also just go on YouTube and found how to dye yarn with Kool-Aid?
Yes, yes. There was, I think, Kim Knits is how I figured out how you could dye yarn with Kool-Aid. So Kim Knits on YouTube.
Isn't it YouTube such a wonderful creation?
It's
You can find
amazing. I learned
everything.
so many things.
So you did this first skein, right? What happened to it, by the way?
I actually ended up dyeing self-striping yarn first because I was learning how to knit socks. And when I first started dyeing yarn, I was learning how to knit socks, and I wanted self-striping yarn, and that was a process. wrapping, doing the wraps and, getting the stripes just perfect. And it was an experience. And after I washed the finished object, it still smelled like Kool-Aid. So it smelled good.
Well, do you always approach everything in life like this? You jump in and you go for the more difficult things first, and then you figure out how you to do something easier?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. I think that's how I work. Yeah, I just go for the whatever catches my eye, whether it be difficult or easy. But yeah, pretty much.
I mean, I feel like it's sometimes this is the best approach in life. Like you go for what you like versus what you think is reasonable for your level, because there's like never like brioche is not reasonable for anybody. Like dyeing self-striving yarn with Kool-Aid is probably not that reasonable either.
Right.
And I feel like we stop ourselves from trying interesting things because we think it's just like next level.
Yes. Yeah. That's for me. There is no, I'm always expanding what I can do, and just learning is key for me. Especially with knitting, I eventually want to, design more patterns. And so learning new techniques whether it be on my own, trying out new things or YouTube. So yeah, or knitting other people's patterns.
So you talking a design, you recently designed your hat, right? It just
Yes,
came
it's
out.
my first hat design that's published.
So talk about it. How did you come up with that hat? How was the design process? What did you learn with the design process? What you didn't expect from this, right? Even though like you've knitted so much of other people's patterns, like tell me about that.
Okay, so with my hat, I actually knit this sweater before I began the hat journey, for my ripcord hat. I started with just sketching. First, I did a swatch, which I never really have done. So I swatched, I got my gauge, and then I started sketching how I wanted the sweater to look like. And then I knew I wanted some sort of I-cord in it because I love the way I-cord looks. And then I figured out I wanted it to be Intarsia as well, because I just like the feeling. I like the look of Intarsia. And so I sketched it all out, did all the math, and cast it on right away and made my sweater. Then after that, I was just like, I need a hat too. So I already had my gauge and just went for it with the hat. No pattern and, written down or anything like that. Just did the hat and finished it and loved it. So I wrote it out, and the rest is history.
Was it easy for you to like write it after you did the hat? Like did you have to recalculate every piece of intarsia and like all of that good stuff?
Right. So I actually made 3 hats. So the first one was made with fingering weight yarn held double, which had a little slightly different gauge. It was a little bit tighter. And then I went and did a DK version of the hat, which is the official weight for the hat. And it changed the circumference of the hat, made it looser, better fitting, and it made it more slouchy, which I like. So yeah, there was a little bit of a difference in the 3 samples, but finally concluded it with the DK version.
I mean, I just find it like very telling that your very first design has intarsia in it, which like scares most experienced knitters out there. And you're like, well, here, my very first design.
I like Intarsia. I think it's just so easy. It's completely different from picture knitting, which is also Intarsia. I tried another designer's Intarsia sweater, and I just could not figure it out. So I was like, I need to do some Intarsia knitting of my own, and that's how I designed this sweater. The first time I knit Intarsia. So it's very easy. It's I think people get scared because of all the color changes, but really all you're doing is you're just twisting the yarn around the previous color and then knitting it. So it's really easy. especially if you're just going back and forth and it's not in the round. Even in the round, it's, you know, if you have the right tips, it's easy.
So I saw you did lace. I saw you did brioche. You're doing Intarsia. Is there like anything in the world of knitting that ever scares you?
Um, Not really. I've done mosaic knitting a little bit, and that right there is just, if you're not following row by row and marking off and using your stitch markers in between the repeats, that right there scares me because I don't use lifelines, and I tend to stay away from brioche. Um, I'm fine with simple brioche, but when it comes to like left slanting all the decreases, I'm just like, that's maybe not for me. But cables, I like cables. I don't really do them that much, but I'll probably have some designs with some cables soon.
So, okay, let's go back to the yarn dyeing for a second. You
Okay.
started with this Kool-Aid, right?
Yes.
Then you got into the more sophisticated techniques. You learn more. At what point did you decide to turn it into a business and start selling it?
Okay, so I started my business as dye for knitting, and I was just selling all my yarn in Etsy and making money on the side of my full-time job. I was like, this is cool. You know, I can sell yarn, I can dye yarn for my projects. And then, you know, I got my new job as a mailman, and I was working 56 plus hours a week, didn't really have time to dye yarn. 2.5 years later, I started Twisted Ambitions Yarn. And I just had this, you know, a spark in my head was like, I can do this full time. I see other people doing it full time. You know, I just started telling myself, I can do this. You know, I'm good enough. I can do this. My yarn is good. People seem to like it. And so it just, you know, I made labels. My husband made labels, and, you know, just started selling again. And it felt really good to have people buy my yarn and display it on their Instagram and show the projects they were making out of it. So
Is your husband a knitter as well?
I taught him to knit. He picked it up right away, but it's not for him. He just, yeah, he'd rather be scrolling.
How is he in regards to like all that yarn supply in the house?
Oh my goodness. It gets overwhelming at times because there's yarn everywhere and a lot of it.
Right.
But he's very supportive of me, and he knows that I can go far, and he knows that my ambition's in it, and I'm very inspired. And so he's behind me 1000% in this business.
Do you buy other people's yarn?
I do, whenever I like to treat myself. Like this recent event that I went to was the Knit Stars season 6. It was their grand opening of their new store, and I splurged and I got some Lola Bean, and it's a DK, and it's so soft. It's so soft. I'm actually in the process of making a sweater out of it, and some spun right round in this really cool pumpkin orange color. So yeah, I mean, I treat myself every once in a while, but
How do you stay in control and not use every single skein you dyed for yourself?
by dyeing a lot of the same colorway, because I definitely do keep 1 to 2 skeins for myself each color. I do. I have tons of yarn in my stash.
So, okay, so like when it comes to dyeing, right? Are you like more of an artist or more of a scientist? Like, do you follow exact formula? Can you recreate like to the exact dot on the skein the next batch? Where you stand in that spectrum?
So I would have to say I'm both, which I think most dyers are both, because you create colorways. That's the artist part. You know, you're creating new colorways, and then, you know, replicating the same colorway. Just keep doing it. It's a recipe, so it's down to, you know, math and measuring out the water, the dye, all that placement of the color. But I'd have to say that the creating the new colorways is my favorite.
Do you ever like stop yourself for creating more colors and tell yourself like, Ross, you already have 175 colors? I'm just making up the number, by the way, everybody.
Right.
Like enough is enough. Or like, is it always like new seasonal colors, new ideas? How do you do that?
So I think at first, when I first started dyeing, I was just, ready to pump out different colors all the time and never really keep a collection of colors, in my book. But now recently I've just started, going by the season, like Halloween. So I have Halloween collection that's going to be coming out the 16th, and they'll be expiring after Halloween, and they'll be starting with fall colors and then going into Christmas. So yeah, I like to keep it in the collections now of colorways and bringing back old colorways in the next year.
So like if you make a color, right, for let's say for Halloween, and then at the end of the Halloween it expires, and then somebody writes to you and says, you know what, I really like that color. Can they order it from you? Do you do custom dyes?
I haven't done it before, but I'm not opposed to doing it for, yeah, I'm not opposed to doing that. I think maybe once I have more orders like wholesale, that I probably won't have time to do that. But I'd like to, help any way I can, a person that reaches out. So
Right. So right now you still work as a mailman.
yes.
And you go on the road, you cover your whatever 15 miles, you come home exhausted. When do you dye yarn? When do you find the energy to do that and to knit, right? And all this stuff, like how do you deal with it?
So I do knit on my breaks at work. I take my knitting with me everywhere I go. And as far as dyeing, I get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, and most mornings I start by dyeing yarn. I don't have to be at work till 7:30. So that gives me a little bit of time till I get stuff started, whether it be like just prepping yarn, tying it, putting it in the pans for once I get home. So once I get home, I, finish what I left off, just start dyeing from there. So I dye in the morning and then I dye after work.
Right. Is there ever like, do you ever stress about it that you don't have enough time to do everything you want, that there's like orders coming, or that you promised a shop update and you don't have enough yarn? Like, is that stressful for you, or you just treat it as a hobby right now?
It's definitely stressful. I don't think of my yarn dyeing business as a hobby at all. I did in the beginning, but now I'm really focused on, dyeing for, I want to become a full-time dyer. I want to eventually quit my job and become full-time. Go to shows, events, meet all the new people that I haven't seen, or all the people that I've seen on Instagram in real life. So yeah, I just, that's my dream, is to be a full-time dyer.
So like when you on Instagram, right? And you're very active on Instagram, you meet all these people. Was it like easy for you from the very beginning to establish this customer base? Because like, I mean, there's just so many amazing yarn dyers out there. Like, how do you make yourself to stand out? How do you make yourself noticeable?
It was very hard in the beginning, getting the first 500 followers or whatever, and getting actual sales out of those followers. It was very slow going, and I definitely did, feel overwhelmed. I'm like, is this right? Is this going to be a legitimate business? Can I do this full time? And at that time, I didn't think so. But as I kept growing and growing and learning new skills with knitting and applying my creativeness with color, because I love bright colors. So I knit with bright colors. I think that's what catches most people's eyes when they come to my account, is that I have a lot of bright colors. And so I think that's how I keep growing. I would say.
Do you think it's like an advantage of being a knitter and crocheter when you're dyeing yarn? Because like I've met some yarn dyers who do not knit. Like, do you think it gives you an edge, the fact that you are a knitter?
Um, I'm not sure, to be honest. I don't
Like,
know.
okay, I'll rephrase it. Like, I'll explain why I'm asking it. When you
Yeah,
dye certain yarn, right? Do you already have an idea in your head of what can be done with that particular color? Like when you try a new technique, are you like, I wish somebody would make this with that?
gotcha. Okay, so with this pattern, I dyed these colors specifically for this sweater. Most of the time, I'm just dyeing for like therapy, just to relieve stress, to just be creative. I just like, so the way I dye yarn is I put the skeins in the pans and I just go. I don't really have anything written down whenever I'm making new colorways. That's how I attack that's my strategy for dyeing yarn, is just I don't have anything specific in mind what I'm dyeing for, other than to put in my shop.
Well, okay. Yesterday, I was watching, I don't know how, like if it's recent video, if it's from the earlier, but I was watching you dyeing jungle
Oh,
color yarn.
yeah.
So there is a video on your Instagram where you're showing the dyeing process, right? And there is like different shades of green basically, and I think maybe some brown or something. And you just go boom, 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 and boom, boom, boom. And then you put like second layer of color, and then suddenly it becomes this like amazingly gorgeous color. And the whole time I'm sitting there watching it and I'm thinking, how does that doesn't turn into this just mud? Like
Right.
why, how those that yarn catches the color exactly how you want it to catch color? How do you control that process?
So it's the way that dye sticks to the fiber is by using a mordant, which I use acid, citric acid, and the heat. So as long as you have your water heat level up, and you already have your mordant in there, right when the dye hits the yarn, it soaks it into the fibers. So you have control that way. Like you were saying, how does it not get all muddied up and stuff? If it was cold water and you didn't use any mordant, then you just dump the dye on there, it would just be one pool of different colors, so it wouldn't work very well. But so like heat and mordant is how you do that.
So when you go and you like splash the yarn there, right? Do you have idea before you start pouring that dye? Do you have an idea of what you're trying to achieve, or do you just like first you throw it in there and then you like surprise here what we got?
That's how most of my colorways are made. So that particular colorway jungle, I had dyed it before I did that video, so I was just going off of my recipe, and so it was very easy to just recreate the same color. Um, so yeah.
Do you ever get surprised by what you created?
Yes, I do. A lot of the times I'm just like, wow, I want to keep all of this yarn for myself. But I know I can run a business that way. So I'll dye more and then I'll keep more for myself that way.
So when you come up with colors, are you ever influenced by other dyers out there, or like do you dream of color? Do you walk on the street, you see some pretty flower and you think of color? Like how do you get inspired?
I think definitely other indie dyers. I get a lot of inspiration from their photos, not necessarily their yarn, but like the backgrounds with the yarn. Um, I don't want to recreate,
Right.
somebody else's color, so I definitely don't, I change it. And most of the time I'm working off of, what's in my head at the time. Recently, I've been really big into orange. So I've been doing a lot of orange colorways. With Halloween going on, it works out really well.
Right.
Um, Yeah, I think it's just seeing other people's handmade knits too is a big inspiration of color for me.
So when you go to like yarn store or yarn festivals, do you look at all the yarn like critically from the like did they do a good job dyeing it, what you would do differently, or you just like, oh my god, pretty color, come to me?
Exactly. Pretty color come to me. That's how I am. Whenever I saw this orange color, I was like, that's mine. I don't care how they dyed it. I think it's a beautiful orange. I wish I could dye this orange. It's just so vibrant.
Right.
But yeah, and this teal from Lola Bean is just something that's just amazing. It's just an amazing color. Um, so yeah, it's like, oh, look at all the pretty yarn. Let me buy it all.
Do you have you ever taken like any formal classes that teach you how to dye?
No, I learned everything on YouTube. Hugh Loco is a huge inspiration of mine. All of her videos. There's Essence of Autumn has some really great videos on YouTube. How to learn how to dye yarn. So that's how I started, was that and Kim Knits, and so yeah.
Well, if somebody who just like thinking about getting into this business, right, would ask you for advice, what advice would you give?
I think a business model of how you want to sell your yarn, and if you would want to, if you want to grow fast, if you want to grow slow, do you want to do wholesale? Because I know a lot of indie dyers out there don't want to do wholesale, which are have amazing thriving businesses, so it's kudos to them for being able to do that. But for me, I wanted to do like wholesale and get my yarn everywhere. So I think, yeah, business model, having, knowing where you want to go, and then I guess just learning from there, learning how to dye, and just color placement, how to put the yarn in the pans, all that.
So how did your like production, let's say, change from the very beginning? Equipment
Ah,
wise, like setup wise?
right. I was using propane burners with propane bottles from our local like grocery store. So like camping equipment. And I was running through propane bottle after propane bottle. Ridiculous amounts of money was spent dyeing in my kitchen, having to clean up every single night, everywhere, dye everywhere. And then eventually moving out to my garage, which is what we just did. My husband did all of that this past year. And so now I don't really have to clean up every single night because I get up early in the morning. I can start cleaning then and go on with my day. So yeah, I guess with that, when I was going back to where I was dyeing in my kitchen, Kool-Aid everywhere, vinegar everywhere, on the floor. So yeah, it's been a long 4 years of cleaning up dye everywhere. So yeah,
You're
I'm
like
glad to
really
get.
good at cleaning, basically.
Yes, it's just it's a mess. It can be a mess.
How do you decide what to knit next? Do you go by like something you see? Do you try to do as much as you can, like your own kind of things?
Yes. Well, okay. So I recently have been buying pattern after pattern of other people's designs, and I'm just like, I'm gonna knit that. I'm gonna knit that, and I always end up starting on my own design. So I think lately I've just been working on my own designs, and yeah.
What was like your very first, your own design? Not that you published, but that you like, you suddenly decided that you are a designer.
Probably my ripcord hat, where I decided I was a designer. Plus, I mean, after going to this Knit Stars event, people were like, "You're a designer because you designed a hat, you designed this." And I was like, I never thought of myself as a designer, even though I've designed patterns before. I just never published them. But I just said it to myself. I was like, to be a designer, you have to say that you're a designer, right? So I was just like, I'm a designer.
Well, I mean, it's an interesting question, you know, because I actually had a lot of conversations about it with people, like what makes a designer, right? Because we don't really create new stitches. We just take what existing little designs, right? Something already created, like you take some cable that you like or some stitch that you like, and you recalculate it for your head size, and you recalculate it for the yarn that you're using, and it makes it a design, right?
Mhm.
And it's funny because I never question other people's designs, but I question my own. I'm like, am I a designer? If I didn't follow any pattern, that does that make me a designer, you know?
Right. Yeah. I think a lot of people that just start designing think that way. Unless they have like a background in design or something like that. If you're like just starting, you're just like, I'm not a designer. I don't have 30 patterns out, or, so that's kind of how I felt,
Right.
like that. So.
Well, how was your head received when you published your first design? How was that received?
So I published the pattern the day of the Knit Star season 6, and I also had a wholesale order with them, and I made kits for my hat, had my hat on display, and so it did really, really well in their store, and so I just started promoting it on my Instagram, and I got a bunch of sales that way too. So I mean, it's really nice. And my previous pattern didn't do as well, but it was because my thoughts are because it was pajama pants and it was kind of not too cold. It wasn't the time for pajama pants. So, but
Are those the pants that you were dancing in today in your video on Instagram?
yeah, yes, I just thought, since it's getting closer to the time where people are going to be wearing pajamas, that I should probably put that up again, remind people that it's there just in case they want to knit some pants, some pajama
Well,
pants.
it's also like a perfect project for like all those like leftover bits that you have from different projects, because you can use any yarn there basically, right?
Yes, yes. You can use DK. You can use finger. The pattern calls for fingering weight held double, but you can use DK. So you can do, I mean, pretty much whatever you want. You can make them all one color. I don't. I wouldn't want to do that because I like all colors. So, um, but you can do it however you want. That's the cool thing about other people's patterns. You can make it your own. So.
Do you think it's difficult to grade the patterns? Because I mean, you are one size, but then somebody else can be 3 sizes bigger or 3 sizes smaller. How do you deal with the grading of the patterns?
Okay, so with me, I hate math. I've never liked it. So grading for my pajama pants was really, really my brain, my head. I had to take so many breaks in between. It took me forever to get that pattern out because I wanted to be as inclusive as I could be. Um, and I'll probably go back and make more sizes in that pattern because it needs more for me to be happy with it.
Right.
But as far as grading my own patterns, I think in the future I'll be outsourcing because I don't like math. It just bogs me down. I don't want to think about that stuff. I just want to design and knit the product.
Right. When you published your head, right? When you
Mhm.
wrote the pattern, so from like you mentioned that you don't like swatching. So from swatching to like sketching it to actually knitting it with different yarns, trying it all, modeling it, writing down the pattern. What's your least favorite part of that whole process?
Probably writing out the pattern because it just takes. I mean, I don't like writing in general. I'd rather be knitting. Um, I think that's probably the worst part for me. Photography is really hard. Lighting and just finding the right light. So that's why I like to do most of my modeling photos outside. It's just, natural light's easier.
Right. Can we talk about your dance moves?
Oh my goodness. Or lack thereof. I'm down and dance. I don't. consider myself a dancer, but when I'm happy about something that I've knit, I definitely want to dance. So that's
Well,
for
do
my.
you ever like do you feel like you have a relationship with people on Instagram? Like when you post stuff like that, you're obviously sort of making fun of yourself almost, and then like, I'm happy I'm not a dancer, but here I'm dancing, like, enjoy with me. Do
Yeah.
you feel like you have this connection with people on Instagram? Do you feel like you're part of this large community and they are your friends?
Of course I do. Yes, I do. All the comments, it's all chatter back and forth from me to them, and a lot of my followers have been following me for a long time, and so we, DM each other every once in a while, see how each other doing. So yeah, of course, I feel that friendship. Even though I haven't met them, I still feel that friendship. It's a great community.
Right. Are there ever like any difficult customer service issues when like somebody is displeased with yarn or the shipping is missing or something? Like, does that ever happen and does it stress you?
I've never had any personal experiences with that. I mean, I've had, when I was doing dye for knitting, I did have some photography issues, and so lighting was off a little bit. But I put that in the listing as colors may not be as true to your monitor, from monitor to monitor. So I did have a little angry customer, but everything was settled. I got the yarn back and I sent her new yarn, which she was very pleased with. Gave me a review, an honest review of what had happened, and that I fixed it for her. So that's really the only thing that I've ever come across.
So, talking of that, right? Do you have any like brilliant solution to the problem of taking the picture of the yarn to showcase it to the best, like to the exact color?
Right. So I've actually purchased a lot of different light boxes, different stands for lights, shades, backgrounds. I've tried a lot of stuff. And recently, what I've been doing is just natural light, setting up my photos on my dinner table right next to a window, getting the natural light with some foam boards that are catching the light to display it on the yarn, to make the yarn as true to color as possible.
Right. Where do you find your color inspirations, like outside of the Instagram?
um I think just like mostly stuff I've knit, shawls that I've knit, and I'm just like, I like those colors together, let's do it without that color and then add this color. um I think really I don't have much inspiration. I just go with what colors I think will look good together.
Right. And I know that you and I have so much in common because blue is our favorite color for both. Do you find it like, do you have some colors that you personally would never wear, would never knit with, but like you know that you should make it because you are the yarn dyer and some people might like them?
Right. I think mine is like browns. I'm not a huge fan of browns, although people that wear brown, I think it looks amazing on them. But to me, in my head, I don't think I would look good in brown, which I may actually look good in brown. But it's just that I think that's the one color that I don't care for as much as all the other ones.
Have you ever like dyed the color and it turned completely disastrous in your mind?
Yes. And what I do with that is I over dye those with different colors, and they become one of a kinds, that I'll sell that I can't, reproduce. I won't be able to do it again.
How do your like family, your neighbors, your friends, like people that you know in person, how do they react to the fact that you are a male knitter, that you're wearing your knits, that you are a designer, that you yarn dyer? Do you get like positive, supportive vibes from people around you?
Yes, it's all positive. which is super nice. I surround myself with positive people. I try to, and I really only let those people in my life. That's very important to me because I don't like to be depressed, and having, you know, a negative person in your life bringing you down, saying that you shouldn't be doing this. Um, why do you knit? That's weird. I'm just like, I don't need that. I don't need to hear that. Push that aside and let me continue my knitting and being happy.
Right.
So
Is there something like there was this whole discussion? Like I actually had Romy Hill on my show, and we talked about she started this. I mean, I don't know if she started, but she was very active with the men in shawls because she was posting pictures of her son modeling her shawls, and some of them were like lacy shawls, and she was getting a lot of negative feedback from her followers, and people were unfollowing her and telling her knit him a necktie or something more manly. Um, do you wear your knits? Do you wear your shawls?
so in the beginning, when I when I found out that I could actually knit these beautiful shawls and they look like they weren't handmade, you know, they look amazing. I was like, I don't know why I'm not wearing them. For the longest time, maybe a year or two, I wasn't wearing anything I knit. And I'm just like, where is it? Why is it just sitting on my shelf? And so I started wearing it. And yes, people looked at me differently, but I also thought of it as maybe they're looking at me because they like what they see, you know? And that's right there is the positive thinking. And that's where I try to stay. So yes, I wear my knits any chance I get. Yeah.
Do you think it's our perception? Do you think that people don't respond to men negatively wearing the shawls, or do you think like you just choose to ignore the negative reaction and see the positive, or do you think that it's actually just curiosity, just something that they haven't seen and they're wondering what is it and where can I get it?
I think it's all of those. You know, there's always going to be that person that says you can't do this and you look weird or whatever. Those are the negative people. So, yes, they have their own opinion. That's great, but they're not in my crowd of me even giving that a second thought. So, to the people that are curious about it and want to know, I wish they would be like, hey, I love your sweater. Where did you get it? And I get that a lot. Like when I go to restaurants, I'm just like, yeah, I made it. I knit it, you know, and they're like, oh, that's so cool. You know, I was just hoping I could buy it at Walmart or something. I'm like, you can't get it at Walmart.
The material alone was $200. Thank you very much.
Right.
The when you come to like yarn store, like any random yarn store where people don't necessarily know you, have you ever been questioned like, do you actually know what you're doing? Do you know what you like? Do people react differently to you because you're a guy?
Yes. So if I'm not wearing anything knitted and I go into a yarn store, obviously the people are just like they swarm me. They're like, "Hey, are you here shopping for your wife?" Or I'm like, "No, I'm shopping for myself. I love yarn." And so I just explain and go from there and tell them I dye yarn, and they're like, "Oh, cool." And so it's a nice. Normally it's a nice conversation.
Right.
So.
How do you find like other yarn dyers in the industry, right? Because it's like on one hand, it's a competition because you're selling yarn, they're selling yarn. On the other hand, it's a community where like, you know, the more yarn dyers they are, the more probably knitters they're gonna be, the more wonderful colors they're gonna be, the more opportunities for you you're gonna find. Do you have friends who are yarn dyers?
So I don't have anybody that I like locally that I know that dyes. I've met Moon Draco. I met Rochelle, and she's a great, amazing dyer. I also look at the dyeing yarn business as more of a community than a competition. It is very saturated, a lot of indie dyers, but I don't think that there's enough people to go around to share, you know. And I think that's most important, is lifting other people up instead of just looking for that sale. that doesn't make me happy. I'd rather lift somebody else up and have them sell their yarn versus me trying to get their customers. That's just not who I am.
Right. Um, how do you explain, like, do people question you ever, like, why a skein of yarn dyed by you would cost whatever, $28, let's say, whereas they can go to Joann's and buy a skein of yarn for $5 on sale? Like, how do you explain to people what goes on into the process of creating your yarn?
Well, I'm very transparent about that, because I've had that question from a customer who wanted to purchase my yarn but was like, that's expensive, I can't afford that. And she, messaged me that, and then I told her what went into this. It's not commercially dyed by a machine. It's dyed by my hands, and my hands hurt every day, so and it takes much more time than just one day to dye yarn. It's a process. Sometimes it can take 3 days to dye a skein of yarn, depending on the method that you're using. So,
do you consider yarn dyeing a form of exercise?
I would say that I'm very tired and exhausted and sore by the end of the day and the night. So as far as exercise, I get it walking my 13 miles, that delivering mail. That's my exercise. But
what about all the twisting?
Yeah, it's very it takes a lot of your energy, and standing up over a pan, bending over multiple times, wringing out the skeins, rinsing them. I mean, it's a lot of work.
Right.
Worth it though.
So where you see yourself a few years from now, let's say?
My goal is to become a full-time dyer. So that means no more mail. Unfortunately, I do get my exercise there, but I'll get my exercise somewhere else. But yeah, full-time dyer, events, shows, and meeting all the other fiber artists. That's where I see myself.
Do you dream color? Like, do you dream about yarn colors?
So I do. It's really weird, but yeah, I do.
You like get up in the middle of the night and like I have to write it down?
I have my phone right next to me, I have my notes, and I just put in my notes, dye these colors would look so good together. And yeah.
So when you're not working, when you're not dyeing yarn, when you're not knitting, what can people find you doing? Like, what other things interest you in life?
I play disc golf every once in a while. I play guitar. I like to sing. I can't sing well, but I sing. So yeah, I mean, I'm really mostly just knitting all the time, though. It's crazy. I really do. I just knit all the time. Where I find my release.
Right.
So I have some yarn if you want to see it.
Yeah, please show.
Okay, so this is a new one that I've dyed. I don't have a name for it just yet.
Oh, that's beautiful.
All these different colors in it, and it fades out to like this really dark navy blue.
That's gorgeous.
And then this one I actually have on pre-order in my shop right now, in my Etsy shop. It's Boogeyman, straight pitch black into a turquoise blue into this really cool pumpkin looking orange. And then this one was inspired by Nightmare on Elm Street, Freddy Krueger. So I got the greens and the like dark burgundies into like a red and gray for the knives as his fingers, the gray, like platinum. So it's really fun. Speckles, and of course there's always going to be speckles in my yarn.
Do you make samples with your yarn?
I do. I haven't knit any samples with the yarn that I've recently dyed, but everything that I knit is basically out of my yarn. So like I have the Mosaic Musings shawl. I dyed all the yarn for this. It's just like an orange variegated yarn and like a charcoal. gray. And then the one that I recently finished the Painting Waves shawl by Stephen West. I haven't blocked it or washed it or anything, but it's all like this variegated red, orange to this yellow.
That's like so perfect for the fall.
I know, I can't wait to wear it.
That's so gorgeous.
It's alpaca and cashmere, so it's super soft. But yeah, I knit everything really, mostly out of my own yarn. Scraps. So yeah.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
So, okay, like any plans for design? Like, do you already work on your next design?
Oh, I have a lot of designs written out. It's a lot of time consuming with my job right now. I plan to start pumping out some of these hat designs that I have written down because I've designed probably 7 or 8 hats recently. I haven't shown on Instagram. Some I have shown on Instagram. And I'm working on 2 different sweaters right now. And I have kind of like a couple shawls on. I have a lot of whips.
Well, you mentioned that you don't treat your yarn dyeing as a hobby. Do you treat your knitting as a hobby? Like, does it always take the step back, like to yarn dyeing?
It's always a step back from yarn dyeing. Only because I've found I get most of my excitement from dyeing yarn. That's where my passion is dyeing yarn. But knitting, designing has recently come into my life as something that I really want to give a go and continue with because I just enjoy watching other people knit the things that I've designed. I think that's so cool. The different colors, the different variations. So yeah, I will. It definitely takes a back seat from my dyeing, but yeah, it's coming to light though. I'm just gonna start designing more things.
Well, I can't wait to see what you're gonna create next. Well, thank you so very much for being my guest today. I really enjoyed our chat and getting to know you. And I wish you the best of luck in your business and in your designing career.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure. I really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.